At 9:29 a.m., the air inside the glass conference room was so still that even the projector's hum sounded nervous. My hand hovered above the signature line, the final step in a $3 billion merger I'd spent 18 months building clause by clause. Every camera in the room was fixed on me. Every executive wore the same rehearsed smile, the kind that pretends to celebrate you while secretly waiting for your exit. That's when Leonard Hale, our CEO, cleared his throat and said, almost cheerfully, "Sadie, your role has concluded." For a moment I thought he was joking. The words landed like a power surge, bright, silent, lethal. The HR director, a woman I'd trained years ago, slid a manila folder across the table. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice flat, her hands shaking less than mine. The pen slipped slightly in my grip, somewhere behind me. A camera clicked. Someone coughed. No one looked at me directly. The board members studied the table, as if my dismissal were a meeting note they hadn't read yet. Leonard smiled toward the investors. "We'll proceed without interruption. Without me." I heard a soft beep, the sound of my security badge deactivating mid-heartbeat, on the big display screen. The digital contract still glowed, ready for the final signature, for half a second. A small message flickered in the lower corner, "Author credentials override pending." It vanished before anyone else noticed. My pulse didn't. Now, take a quick pause. If you're among the 96% of people listening who haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now. It's free. It takes 1 second, and it helps us stay caffeinated and sane enough to keep telling stories about justice. About the ones who were cast aside. Just like Sadie Clark. The irony was surgical. I had built Larrington's compliance architecture, designed the smart contract systems that verified authorship, coded the very platform now erasing me. I was the invisible architect behind every merger that made Leonard Hale famous. Now, in front of 12 board members and 4 investors, I was being deleted like a placeholder. I could feel the weight of 12 years pressing behind my ribs late nights, missed birthdays, the soft hum of office lights at midnight when only my reflection kept me company. I'd traded so much of my life for this company's stability, believing competence was protection. Leonard leaned back, voice smooth. "Security will escort you after the signing. Let's remain professional." Professional. The word tasted metallic. I straightened my blazer, set the pen down carefully beside the contract, and looked at him one last time. The cameras captured his smile, not my silence. No one saw the flicker on the screen or the faint curve of my mouth when I whispered to myself, "Override pending," because in that instant, I already knew he hadn't just fired me. He'd triggered something he didn't understand. When I first joined Larrington Systems, the roof leaked every time it rained, and the coffee machine sounded like it was coughing up dust. There were only 12 of us then, 12 people trying to build something from scraps of ambition and borrowed computers. I was 28, idealistic, and foolish enough to believe that loyalty was a kind of armor. Leonard Hale wasn't a CEO back then. He was the man who stayed late beside me, sleeves rolled up, promising that one day, "This place will mean something." I believed him, the way young people believe in potential, like it's immune to greed. When the company struggled through its first audits, I wrote an internal compliance system from scratch, line by line, until the servers finally purred instead of stuttered. That system became the company's backbone, the very engine behind every billion-dollar transaction that would later make Leonard a household name in the corporate world. I remember birthdays spent under fluorescent lights, watching the rain trail down cracked windows while others toasted champagne in conference rooms I wasn't invited to. I missed one vacation, then another, until they stopped asking. And then came the decision I never forgave myself for. Mom's health was slipping. Her messages grew shorter, her voice quieter. The last call I got from the nursing home said she still kept the photo of me on her bedside table. "The one taken during my first month at Larrington," she used to say. "Don't let them take your name off the work you've done." I promised her I wouldn't. Then I missed her final week because of a contract deadline. The night after she passed, I sat alone in the office and stared at the endless code of my compliance framework. That's when I decided her words deserved to live somewhere that couldn't be erased. I took Leonard's favorite phrase, the one he used when the company finally broke even. The one he said with a glass of bourbon in hand. "Your name will always be in every contract we touch." He meant it as flattery. I made it literal, buried deep within the architecture of Larrington's system, inside the encryption pattern itself. I wrote a string of code that replicated my digital signature. Every time a contract was generated, a hidden subroutine embedded a trace of me, authored by S. Clark, into the metadata. Invisible, unremovable, permanent. Leonard never knew. He probably never cared enough to ask how his empire worked. Only that it worked for him. That was the difference between us. He saw value in outcomes, and I saw it in integrity. Sometimes, late at night, I'd stare at the blinking lights of the server racks and wonder if they remembered me better than the people I worked for. Maybe machines were more honest. They only fail when you stop feeding them truth. 12 years, 12 contracts, 12 billion in cumulative deals, and not once did anyone say thank you. Now, as I think back, that hidden line of code feels less like a precaution and more like a confession, a way to remind myself that even in silence, I had marked my place in history. Leonard's promise had come true, just not the way he imagined, because no matter how high he climbed, every contract that carried his triumphs also whispered my name beneath the surface, an echo inside the code. A quiet rebellion written in loyalty and loss. 2 weeks before the signing, I began to notice the small things first, the kind of details most people overlook. A flicker in the activity log, a midnight entry, a name that didn't belong there. Damon Keats, Larrington's new strategic officer, Leonard's latest golden boy. The first time I saw his credentials accessing the core compliance system at 12:43 a.m., I assumed it was a clerical error. No one but me ever touched those directories. They were my territory, my blueprint, my fingerprints coded into every rule of authorization. Yet the system flagged download activity detected. By the third night, it was impossible to ignore. Files I had written months ago were being duplicated, renamed, and stripped of author data. The naming pattern was sloppy. Damon didn't even bother to change the internal timestamps. It was like watching someone try to copy a language they didn't speak. The next morning, I confronted Leonard. His office smelled of imported leather and ego. I told him someone had been accessing restricted repositories. He didn't even look up from his monitor. "Relax. Sadie," he said with a smile that could have been carved from plastic. "He's just learning your system." Learning my system, I had spent a decade designing it. Every security layer, every recursive check, every algorithm that verified authorship. It wasn't something you learned. It was something you respected. But Leonard didn't believe in respect. He believed in control. And Damon Young, loud and eager to please, was exactly the kind of man who mistook recklessness for innovation. That night I stayed late, staring at the terminal as the office lights timed out one by one. For years, I had built walls to protect the company's integrity. Now I realized I needed to build one to protect myself. So, I did what I always did best. I hid my brilliance where no one could see it. Inside the metadata of my master framework, I inserted a single invisible line. One sentence that would live within every document the system ever produced. Primary author S. Clark, required for validation. It wasn't just a tag. It was a trigger. If anyone attempted to remove my authorship, the validation sequence would fail. Quietly, automatically, irreversibly. No alarms, no flashing warnings. Just silence, the kind that makes people doubt their own competence. When I tested it, the result was seamless. The system accepted my input as if it had always been there. The trap was invisible, buried beneath thousands of legitimate lines of code, indistinguishable from company logic. I sat back in my chair, heart steady but hands trembling. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was preparation. Over the following nights, Damon's name appeared again and again, copying editing, deleting. Each time, the hidden line replicated itself inside the new file, like a digital heartbeat that refused to stop. He thought he was rewriting history. He was really engraving mine deeper. Still, unease stayed with me. The office felt colder now, the air too sterile, the hum of the servers too aware. I'd walk past Leonard's door and hear laughter, Damon's laugh, thin and sharp, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before your mind catches up. I knew then that something was shifting. Trust was no longer part of the equation. I wasn't protecting the company anymore. I was protecting the truth. And if they were planning betrayal, I had just ensured they'd trip over it the moment they tried to erase me. By the time the city lights began to fade into the early gray of morning, I had already rewritten the final section of the merger. The contract sat before me, a mountain of clauses, cross-references, and risk assessments so dense that even a seasoned legal team would need weeks to unpack it. I wasn't just finishing a deal, I was constructing an ecosystem, one that obeyed a single invisible rule: no signature could ever exist without the author who built its foundation. That was the essence of the Phantom Clause. It wasn't a loophole, it was a mirror. Hidden beneath the PDF veneer was a blockchain-linked verification field, a string of encrypted author data only detectable in the master file. To everyone else, it was a normal contract. To the system, it was alive. It could sense authenticity. It knew its creator. For weeks, I had been building it quietly, one revision at a time. Each test produced a heartbeat in the audit trail, tiny pulses of code, confirming that the network recognized me as the origin. It didn't just store authorship, it verified truth. I didn't do it to sabotage anyone. Not then. I did it because I'd spent too many years watching credit dissolve into someone else's smile. Every idea I'd authored had been repackaged under a louder name. Every milestone I'd reached was shadowed by Leonard's voice claiming, "We built this together." Except we never stayed for the all-nighters or the empty office at 2:30 a.m., when only the printer light blinked like a tired eye. We didn't miss funerals or fall asleep over compliance reports. We didn't code the system that kept this company alive. I did. So when the final draft of the $3 billion merger came to my desk, I added the clause. Quietly, precisely, lawfully, it existed in metadata, not ink. No one could see it, but the blockchain could, and the blockchain never lies. The signature sequence required dual validation, one from the company's representative, and one from the original author. If the author was removed or altered, the contract would automatically suspend. No fireworks, no warnings, just elegant failure. The irony is, Leonard unknowingly made it stronger. He was in a rush that morning, desperate to meet the submission deadline for investor review. The board had been breathing down his neck for days, and he hated the idea of anyone else having control over the timing. So, when the system requested a secondary certification, the author verification file, he signed it himself. He didn't ask what it was, didn't read the description, didn't even scroll past the first line, just clicked confirm. And with that careless gesture, he linked his digital signature to mine. The system recognized it immediately, the dual validation sequence activating like a lock accepting its rightful key. Primary author Sadie Clark, secondary signatory Leonard Hale, verification status, legal ownership, joint chain. Leonard thought he was speeding through bureaucracy. In truth, he had just handed me legal authorship over the contract, a tie so deeply encoded that no one could alter the document without triggering a compliance audit. When the confirmation notice appeared, I remember leaning back in my chair, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. My pulse stayed steady. My hands didn't shake. There was no thrill, no gloating, only the calm certainty that I had done something irreversible. Not out of spite, out of order, because I knew what was coming, the way Leonard's praise had begun to sound like distance, the way Damon Keats lingered around meetings that used to be mine. The ground beneath my name was shifting. But panic was useless. Precision wasn't. So I sealed the contract, checked the audit log one final time, and encrypted the master file. My reflection in the monitor looked unbothered, even faintly amused. They could take my title. They could strip my access. But they couldn't sign away what was written in truth because he'd already signed with me. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning. Disguised as celebration, the company auditorium pulsed with the sound of polite applause, that hollow rhythm people use when they're afraid to stop clapping before everyone else does. I sat in the front row, legs crossed, hands folded, watching Leonard Hale take the stage with his usual grin, polished to perfection. He waited for the lights to dim before making it official. "Everyone," he began. "It's time to welcome the next era of Larenton Systems, led by our new strategic director, Damon Keats." Applause exploded. The spotlight shifted. Damon stepped forward, youthful and self-satisfied, waving at faces that barely knew him. I forced a smile that hurt more than it looked. The kind of smile that keeps your dignity intact, while something inside you fractures quietly. I'd trained half the people clapping. I'd built the system that made this company possible. And yet, in that moment, I was invisible, reduced to a line in the quarterly report they'd soon archive and forget. Leonard's voice rolled through the microphone. "Sadie has been an invaluable part of this journey. She'll assist Damon through the transition period." Transition, that word again. Always so polite, so surgical. He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. He never did when he was lying. The meeting ended in a flurry of handshakes and hollow congratulations. People whispered as I passed small condolences dressed up as compliments. "You've done so much. Sadie, you're the foundation. You'll always be part of this place." Foundations, I thought. Get buried under new buildings. That night, when the office emptied out and the air turned still, I stayed behind. The monitors cast blue shadows across the walls. On my desk sat a thin envelope, yellowed at the edges, no name, no date. Just my mother's handwriting, I'd know it anywhere. Inside, one line written in fading ink, "Don't ever let them erase your story." I stared at it for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. My mother had written that years ago, before her illness. When I first joined Larenton, she'd mailed it after hearing me talk about how proud I was to be building something bigger than myself. She understood something I hadn't: when you give too much of yourself to something that doesn't love you back, it will one day call your devotion expendable. I set the card beside my keyboard, its edges catching the light like a silent oath. The next morning, Damon stopped by my office. His cologne arrived before he did too sharp, too confident. He leaned on the doorframe, grinning like a child playing dress-up. "Hey," he said, "Leonard wants me to review the compliance framework with you today. Guess I'm taking over sooner than expected." "Sooner I asked. Still typing." He shrugged. "Yeah, Thursday, right. That's when the contract's finalized. After that, they don't really need you anymore." He froze halfway through the sentence. Realizing what he'd just said, the silence between us thickened. I looked up slowly, forcing calm into my voice. "Thursday," I repeated. "Good to know." He laughed awkwardly, mumbling something about nerves, then disappeared down the hall. I sat there, motionless, feeling the blood rise in my throat but refusing to give it air. Anger wasn't useful. Not yet. Instead, I let the words settle: Leonard's timeline, Damon's eagerness, my mother's warning, all of it aligning like pieces of a machine, finally revealing its design. I wasn't going to fight them with noise or panic. I'd learned long ago that true power doesn't shout, it waits. And as the city lights flickered against the glass wall that night, I whispered to the empty room, "They won't erase me." Then I picked up my mother's card, placed it carefully inside my notebook, and began outlining what I would do next calmly, deliberately, and without mercy. The morning of the signing arrived with an unnerving calm, the kind of stillness that settles before a storm you already know is coming. The office air was colder than usual, sterilized by over-conditioned air and tension from my corner desk. I could see the boardroom through the glass partition, the stage where the $3 billion merger would unfold in less than 2 hours. I opened the master contract on my monitor for the final time. line by line. I scanned through the clauses I had memorized months ago, cross-referencing timestamps, security layers, and digital certificates. Every semicolon mattered. Every hidden field carried weight. The phantom clause, my invisible safeguard, rested deep within the code, dormant and silent, waiting for the system's internal clock to strike the activation threshold. It would come alive only once the signing sequence was initiated. The system was a living organism, one I had nurtured for years. Its heartbeat pulsed through the network's encrypted servers. Subtle but steady, it recognized me as its architect, the same way a fingerprint recognizes the hand it belongs to. If the company severed that connection, the system would do exactly what it was designed to do: demand verification. At 7:45 a.m., a faint glow flickered on the lower corner of my screen. My private server, the one hidden from Larenton's network, had sent a system ping verification window 60 minutes post-signing. For a long moment, I just stared at the message. It wasn't an alert. It was a reminder, a countdown that belonged solely to me. 60 minutes after the signing, the system would search for my biometric validation. If it couldn't find it, it would trigger the lockout sequence automatically. I leaned back in my chair, hands clasped together. The hum of the servers behind me filled the silence like slow breathing. This was it, the edge of inevitability. Across the hall, Damon Keats was pacing, waving a stack of printouts, pretending to understand what he was holding. He caught my eye through the glass and offered a thumbs up, that smug, oblivious gesture that made my stomach tighten. I nodded back once, the kind of nod that could be mistaken for surrender. Leonard's voice carried faintly through the open conference room door, smooth and commanding as ever. "Let's make history today," he said. The irony almost made me laugh. I returned to my screen, reviewing the verification script. It had never failed a single test. The clause would remain invisible to anyone opening the PDF, even to high-level auditors. But in the encrypted core, the one no one else ever touched, the clause was awake, watching. If I'd wanted revenge, I could have made the system crash outright. But that wasn't my purpose. This wasn't malice, it was precision. Years of restraint had taught me something far more valuable than anger patience. The world underestimated quiet people. It assumed stillness meant weakness. But stillness could be strategic. At 8:30, I walked into the boardroom. The long table gleamed beneath the lights, polished within an inch of vanity. Laptops were open, documents ready, coffee cups aligned like soldiers. Leonard greeted the investors with his trademark confidence, his voice warm, rehearsed, utterly insincere. Damon sat beside him, adjusting his tie with nervous pride. I took my seat at the far end, the position they'd quietly relegated me to, close enough to witness, too far to belong. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they discussed timelines, I silently rechecked the system interface on my tablet. Every value held steady clause dormant, checksum valid, encryption unbroken. The mechanism was perfect. At 8:59, Leonard turned to me, smile sharp as glass. "Sadie, we appreciate everything you've done to bring us here." I smiled back, small, deliberate, unshaken. "It's been unforgettable." Inside, there was no anger left, just clarity. My phone vibrated once, a subtle pulse from the private server confirming readiness. The verification clock had begun counting down from 60 minutes. I exhaled slowly, steady and composed. The trap was already alive, and none of them could feel it yet. While they raised their glasses to a new chapter, I traced the rim of my coffee cup, eyes fixed on the glowing digital contract reflected on the glass wall. They thought I'd been written out of the story, but the story was already signed in my name, and it would remember me, whether they wanted it to or not. The clock on the wall ticked toward 9:29 a.m., each second a blade cutting through what was left of my composure. I stood there in the boardroom, surrounded by glass walls and indifference, holding the pen that was supposed to finalize the $3 billion merger I had built clause by clause. Then came the words that would slice deeper than any headline: "Let's proceed without her." Leonard's tone was brisk, almost casual, as if dismissing a consultant instead of the woman who had architected every line of the deal. The HR director hovered beside him, her clipboard trembling slightly. "Sadie, this is effective immediately," she said. I watched her lips move, but her voice felt distant, distorted by the dull roar in my ears. My badge deactivated with a soft, synthetic beep, the sound of erasure disguised as procedure. One moment I existed in their system, the next. I was a blank field in a database. Two investors sat nearby, silent and uncomfortable. They didn't look at me. No one ever looks at a person being undone. They stared at the table. Their coffee cups. Anything but my face. I could almost hear the thought running through their minds. Don't interfere. Don't align yourself with the doomed. Leonard straightened his tie, turning to them with a smile rehearsed to the millimeter. Let's keep things moving. We're on schedule. The cruelty wasn't in his words. It was in the ease with which he said them. I felt something inside me tighten. Not break, not yet. Breaking would have been easier. This was worse. It was a cold, deliberate locking of pain somewhere deep behind the ribs. I gathered my things with mechanical precision. A leather-bound notebook filled with years of notes, a silver pen engraved with my initials, a gift from Leonard before his promotion, and a photo of my mother, smiling from another lifetime, her hand resting on my shoulder the day I joined Larenton. The room stayed silent, except for the soft scrape of the pen rolling off the table and onto the floor. No one bent to pick it up. I knelt, retrieved it myself, and slipped it into my pocket. My fingers didn't shake. They were too numb for that. As I zipped my bag, Leonard said quietly, "Security will escort you after the signing." I nodded once. Words would have only cheapened the moment. Then I walked toward the door. Each step echoed against the marble floor, a slow metronome counting down the last seconds of a life I had built and lost inside this building. I didn't look back. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing my face collapse. But just as the door slid open, my smartwatch vibrated softly against my wrist. I glanced down. A small notification blinked in white text, author verification locked. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. But the words stayed, crisp and certain. The system had recognized my dismissal and sealed itself exactly as I designed it to. A frozen calm settled over me, cutting through the humiliation like ice through smoke. The pain didn't fade. It crystallized sharp, cold, controlled. Behind me, voices resumed, laughter, conversation, the hum of business as usual. The world didn't stop for my unraveling. And that, somehow, made it worse. Outside the conference room, the air felt heavier. The hallway lights blurred slightly, reflections bending on the polished floor. I paused only once, glancing at the mirrored glass that separated me from the life I'd just lost. Leonard's reflection moved behind the glass, smiling for investors. I adjusted the strap of my bag and whispered, almost without sound, "You'll see." The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. My reflection followed me steady, silent, unbroken. Some people think revenge begins with rage. Mine began with stillness, and somewhere deep in the network I built. A clock had just started ticking. From the marble lobby below, I could see the entire stage unfold through the glass mezzanine above. Screens streamed the live signing to every department across the company. The lighting was immaculate, the branding pristine, every pixel of the event engineered to tell the story of triumph. Leonard Hale stood at the center of it all, pressed suit, steady voice, smile rehearsed to the millimeter. Cameras adored him. Investors leaned forward, eyes glinting with anticipation. Damon Keats, standing 2 steps behind him, looked like a man who'd just won the lottery he didn't buy a ticket for. I stood quietly among the onlookers in the lobby, blending into the hum of employees craning their necks to watch the broadcast. My phone screen mirrored the same feed. A few seconds delayed. The irony of it all felt surgical. Leonard spread his arms like a preacher before his congregation. "Today marks a new era for Larenton Systems," he declared, his voice smooth as glass. An era of innovation, leadership, and unshakable integrity. Integrity. The word nearly made me laugh. Applause thundered from the boardroom upstairs. I could almost feel the vibration in the floor. On screen, Leonard reached for the digital stylus. Damon leaned in, smiling for the cameras, his reflection glinting off the polished table. Their movements were slow, ceremonial, two men claiming victory over something they thought they understood. I knew what was coming. I had built what was coming. The digital signature process began. The display behind them lit up with the company seal, gold and brilliant against the backdrop of blue. Leonard turned toward the investors, extending his hand with an air of finality. Damon followed, eager to be seen. Applause erupted once more, full, loud, and unrestrained. For 8 whole seconds, everything appeared perfect. Investors clapped. Employees cheered. Leonard's wife, seated in the front row, dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Damon grinned so wide it looked painful. The live chat stream beneath the broadcast exploded with messages. Historic day. We did it. Larrington leads the future. 8 seconds of flawless illusion. Then, it happened. The LED display behind them flickered once, barely noticeable at first, then again. Harder. The applause faltered slightly. The third flicker turned the entire background crimson. Authorization error. Primary author not found. Contract verification failed. The room above me froze. Leonard's smile stiffened, his hand still mid-air in an unfinished gesture. Damon's grin collapsed into confusion. For a fraction of a second, no one understood what they were seeing. Then murmurs began. One of the investors leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Another checked his tablet. The broadcast audio picked up fragments of panic technical issue. Reload the system, run the patch. But there was no patch. The clause had activated. I watched from below, perfectly still. My heartbeat synchronized with the chaos I had predicted to the minute. The phantom clause had awakened exactly as it was meant to. The system, searching for my author verification, had found nothing because I had been removed. The logic was airtight. No author, no validation, no contract. 60 minutes after signing, the window had closed. But the moment the attempt registered, the system's watchdog protocol triggered instantly, pulling the foundation from beneath the deal. On the broadcast, the big red banner expanded across every monitor. Transaction invalid. Verification conflict detected. Leonard's voice cracked through the microphone. There must be an error. Fix it now, behind him. Damon leaned over the screen, frantically typing. His movements were jittery, desperate. The audience, sensing something catastrophic, began whispering. Investors exchanged looks, the kind that cost billions. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't breathe too deeply. 8 seconds ago, they thought they had won. Now, they were unraveling live before the world. One woman nearby gasped softly at the sight on the screen. What's happening? She whispered. I turned my phone face down on the counter, the screen still flashing crimson light. Just a verification delay, I said. Voice calm, detached, inside. I felt neither joy nor anger, only confirmation. The storm had finally touched down exactly where it was meant to, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to do a thing. The boardroom froze at 9:30 a.m. The air that only moments ago buzzed with applause now thickened into silence so absolute it seemed to swallow sound itself. On the massive LED display behind Leonard Hale, the gold company logo glitched, twisted, and then the red text appeared. Authorization error. Primary author not found. Owner of record Sadie Clark. Secondary signatory Leonard Hale. Timestamp 9:30 a.m. No one moved, no one breathed. For 8 triumphant seconds. The deal had been perfect, then it ruptured like glass under heat. The investors' smiles faltered first, replaced by confusion, then dread. A reporter lowered his camera, unsure whether to keep filming or run for confirmation. "Is this part of the presentation?" one investor whispered. Leonard didn't answer. His face drained of color as the screen refreshed, the words reappearing with merciless precision. "Verification failed. Contract invalid." He turned sharply to Damon. "Fix it." His voice cracked on the second word, but the command came out sharp enough to cut. Damon's fingers trembled as he leaned over the laptop, typing frantic commands. "It's a minor glitch," he stammered, sweat beading at his temple. "It's just a sync error." The screen blinked again. "Replication detected. Cross-verification initiated. Mirror server SEC compliance node." The color drained from Damon's face. He looked up, eyes wide. "Leonard, the system mirrored live data to the SEC. It's already been uploaded." The words hit harder than any alarm. Around the table, the investors began murmuring, half standing, exchanging sharp whispers that carried the edge of panic. Phones vibrated. Someone cursed under their breath. Leonard's composure cracked, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the back of his chair until his knuckles blanched. "Shut it down," he said through gritted teeth. "It's mirrored," Damon repeated helplessly. "We can't. Once it hit the SEC servers, it's permanent. They're seeing this in real time." The room erupted. I watched from the lobby feed on my phone, still as a statue. Around me, employees crowded the monitors, whispering, their confusion rising like static. "What's happening? Did the deal collapse?" someone asked. I didn't answer. On the live feed, Leonard's voice wavered as he faced the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief technical issue. Our team is resolving it as we speak." But the microphones were still on, catching every frantic exchange behind him. "This isn't a glitch. The author of record, who the hell is Sadie Clark? It's on the SEC site, look." The realization rippled through the room like electricity. The red banner on the wall glowed brighter, synchronized with the external display now mirrored across global financial feeds. Every attempt to override the system only confirmed one unchangeable fact: the legal author was me. I could almost feel Leonard's fear from where I stood. He'd built his empire on certainty, on control. But control had a single point of failure, and he'd signed it himself. Damon's voice cracked. "Leonard, it's verifying her blockchain key. The ownership chain goes straight to her credentials. There's no override." "No," Leonard hissed, shaking his head. "That's impossible." But it wasn't. It was math. It was law. It was truth written in code. One investor slammed his palm on the table. $3 billion. "And you didn't verify the authorship." Leonard opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His throat bobbed. Sweat pooled at his collar. The reporters had begun filming again. Cameras zoomed in on the flashing red words. The timestamp frozen like an accusation, 9:30 a.m. In the lobby, I slipped my phone back into my pocket. My reflection in the glass wall was calm, measured, composed. Around me, people buzzed with speculation, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. "Who's Sadie Clark?" one intern whispered. "Whoever she is." Another replied, "She just tanked a $3 billion deal." I walked toward the exit, each step deliberate. The noise faded behind me until there was only the sound of my heels on marble and the faint echo of my heartbeat. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The system was doing all the talking, above me. The screens continued to flash red. Primary author not found. Ownership verified. Record locked. It wasn't revenge. It was rectification. For 12 years. I had been the ghost inside their machine. Unseen but essential, now. The machine itself had spoken the truth I no longer needed to say aloud. By 9:32 a.m., the ticker on every screen in the building was bleeding red. In less than 2 minutes, Larenton Systems had lost $700 million in market value. Phones rang in every corner. Legal teams from 3 continents demanded explanations. And no one in that boardroom had one to give. At the center stood Leonard Hale, the CEO, once polished, now unraveling. His voice cracked through the panic. Override the system. Now the command ricocheted off the glass walls, useless against the storm of chaos. The IT director rushed forward, typing frantically, "Sir, we can't. The blockchain credential is locked to the original author. Every attempt to bypass it triggers a verification cascade." Leonard slammed his palm on the table. "Then find another way." But the system didn't care about panic or hierarchy. It only cared about truth. Behind him, Damon Keats, the lead engineer, typed furiously, sweat glistening on his temple. "I've tried every protocol," he gasped. "The author key, Sadie's key, it's embedded at the root chain. If we touch it, the network flags the modification as fraud." Leonard's jaw clenched. "Then find a loophole." "There isn't one," Damon shouted. "Her code authenticates through the compliance ledger. No one, not even you, can alter it without her biometric verification." For a long second, the room went still. The only sound was the low hum of servers, relentless, impartial. By 9:40, Larrington's partners had suspended all transactions. A message flashed across every global dashboard: contract source, invalid, pending author, confirmation. Leonard went pale. Around him, investors whispered like vultures circling the fall. The empire he'd built on control was collapsing in front of him, and the system he'd underestimated was simply doing its job. Then came a sound no one expected: a single notification ping. The IT director froze. "Sir, it's from her email." Leonard's head snapped up. "Who's Sadie Clark's?" Leonard blinked. "That's impossible. Her account was terminated." "It's still connected to the compliance network." The director stammered. "It just received the ownership log." He turned his laptop toward Leonard. On the screen glowed a single line: "Contract invalidated, ownership transfer S." "Clark." The air left the room. Even the server seemed to pause. Leonard's face twisted, disbelief colliding with fury. "No, this isn't legal." But legality had already decided. The blockchain had authenticated the transaction. The company no longer belonged to him. I knew the moment it happened. My phone buzzed once, the same report landing quietly in my inbox. No alarms, no drama, just confirmation. Ownership transfer completed. Through the glass facade, I could see them: Leonard shouting, Damon pleading, the board splintering into chaos. Their gestures looked exaggerated, panicked, like actors who'd lost their lines. I stood still, watching from the lobby as the machine I had built executed its final command with mathematical precision. There was no vengeance in it, only symmetry. One of the interns brushed past me, whispering into her phone, "They're saying the system gave it back to her, to Sadie Clark." I pretended not to hear. Inside, Leonard's voice cracked. "Get her on the line, get her back." But there was nothing to get back. The system had spoken. At 9:45 a.m., the SEC's public ledger updated: Larrington Systems contract authorship transfer verified. Record ID 4910. In one moment, the company that had erased me now displayed my name on every compliance report in existence. Not revenge, not anger, just verification, the truth rising through the code like light through glass. I glanced down at my phone, the email still glowing softly. Contract invalidated, ownership transfer S. Clark. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't loud. It was complete. Behind me, the city went on, cars moving, screens flashing, lives untouched by the fall of an empire. I slipped my phone into my coat pocket and stepped outside into the cold air. It wasn't destruction. It was restoration, the system doing exactly what I built it to do. And as Larrington burned quietly from the inside out, I walked away, calm and certain, the architect of both its order and its undoing. The call came in just after 10 o'clock that night. The city outside my apartment window was still humming from the aftershock of the collapse, markets scrambling, reporters spinning theories. Leonard Hale's empire bleeding value by the hour. I let the phone ring twice before answering. "Ms. Clark," a calm, professional voice said. "This is Michael Tarrant, counsel for the acquiring firm." I didn't reply immediately. I recognized the name, one of the lawyers who'd stood beside Leonard during the early negotiations. Confident, untouchable. Now his tone carried something unfamiliar respect. "We'd like to reopen discussions," he continued, "but this time under your leadership. The board would prefer to finalize the merger directly with you, as the verified author and owner of record." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was deliberate. I wanted him to feel the weight of those words, the way they settled into the air like dust after a detonation. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. "Send the terms. No triumph, no anger, just precision." I hung up, set the phone down beside my half-empty coffee, and exhaled. The victory didn't taste sweet. It was clean, sterile, almost surgical. Justice, when done right, doesn't shout, it corrects. Across the room, the TV flickered with muted headlines. "Larenton collapse, 3B deal disintegrates in 8 seconds." Anchors dissected the chaos like vultures. Every network carried the same clip, Leonard standing frozen in front of the flashing red screen, stammering through the moment he realized control had slipped from his hands. Now, hours later, he was back on air, trying to rewrite the narrative. I turned up the volume. Leonard's voice filled the room, calm but cracking beneath the surface. "We experienced a temporary system malfunction," he said smoothly. "Our IT team is working to restore the data integrity issue. There was never a question of ownership." He smiled, that same practiced expression I'd seen 1,000 times in boardrooms, but his eyes betrayed him. They flicked down and to the side, searching for control he no longer had. The host asked the question everyone wanted to ask, but, "Mr. Hale, the SEC database lists Sadie Clark as the verified author and owner of the contract. How do you explain that?" Leonard paused, a flicker of panic cutting through the mask. "That information is being reviewed." He blinked rapidly, searching for an escape he couldn't code or charm his way through. The silence stretched. The host didn't save him. And then, mid-interview, the network cut to a live update from the Department of Commerce. A government spokesperson stood at a podium, flanked by screens displaying the verified document chain. Her voice was firm, unflinching. "Following a compliance investigation, the authorship records for the Larenton-Hensley acquisition contract have been authenticated. The verified owner and original architect of record is Ms. Sadie Clark. Any modification without her biometric approval is legally void." The broadcast returned to the studio just in time to catch Leonard's face collapse, a single breath of disbelief, before the feed cut away. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I simply muted the television and sat back in the quiet glow of my living room. For 12 years, Leonard had been the voice of my work. Now the system had spoken for me, calm, factual, irrefutable. My inbox pinged with new messages, legal invitations, partnership requests, media inquiries. Every subject line began with my name. I ignored them all, instead. I opened the folder that had once held my mother's handwritten note, the one she'd left me before she passed. The paper was thin, almost translucent now. "Don't ever let them erase your story." She'd been right. And maybe, somewhere, she understood that what I'd done wasn't vengeance. It was preservation, the restoration of authorship in a world that treated loyalty like a disposable resource. Outside, rain tapped against the window. The city looked cleaner somehow, stripped of illusion. I closed my laptop, the blue light fading across my reflection. For the first time in years, my name didn't feel like a whisper buried in someone else's success. It was visible, recorded, immutable, not because I fought louder, but because I fought smarter. Tomorrow, negotiations would begin again under my terms. Tonight, I let the silence settle around me, not as absence, but as peace. They had tried to erase me. The system had remembered. And that, I thought, was justice enough. A week later, the storm had quieted. The city moved on. The market stabilized. And the chaos that once roared around Larenton had dissolved into a dull murmur of post-mortem headlines. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing into someone else's office. I was walking into my own. The conference room was smaller, humbler, but peaceful. Sunlight spilled through the blinds, touching the glass table where a new contract waited. The header read Independent Principal Consultant, S. Clark. The same firm that once negotiated with Leonard now sat across from me, polite, professional, measured. There were no bright lights, no cameras, no applause, just quiet respect. We'd like to move forward under your direct oversight. Their lead counsel said, Larrington will no longer be involved. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. I read every page, line by line, ensuring that each clause was honest, that every word would stand on its own. No deception, no hidden motives, just clarity. When I finally signed, I did it with a hand steady not from pride, but from peace. As they shook my hand and left, I remained at the table, opening my laptop one last time. The screen glowed softly, the familiar hum of my private server filling the quiet. There, at the bottom of the system's core directory, I typed a single line of code, my final message to the network that had once carried my name into chaos. Author integrity shall remain inviolable. The system accepted it instantly, saving it into the immutable chain. A digital promise, a vow. Outside, news tickers scrolled across the screens of passing taxis. Claus Clark, the woman who wrote justice into a $3 billion deal. I smiled faintly, not because they called me victorious, but because they finally called me by my name. Leonard Hale had resigned 2 days earlier, citing health and personal reasons. The real reason was printed across every financial paper, pending investigation for regulatory misconduct. Damon had vanished from the company directory, and Larrington was in talks for restructuring. The empire that once erased me was now rewriting itself. Piece by piece, I leaned back, watching the sunlight stretch across the floor. There was no satisfaction in their downfall, only stillness, the kind that follows truth finally being restored, the kind that lets you breathe without armor. I thought of my mother's words again. Don't ever let them erase your story. She had been right all along. Justice didn't need to scream. It only needed to endure. When I closed the laptop, the world outside felt lighter. The air, the light, even the silence carried something softer. It wasn't about reclaiming power anymore. It was about reclaiming peace. And for the first time in 12 years, I had both, sometimes. The quietest victories are the loudest proof that integrity endures. I didn't win by shouting. I won by staying true, even when silence cost everything. If this story reached you the way it still echoes in me, tell me what part spoke to you most. Leave a comment, share it with someone who's ever been silenced, and tap that like button if you believe dignity can outlast power. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, because there are more stories like this waiting to remind us that truth, no matter how long it takes, will also return, radiant and proud,